Complete Chess Strategy, Part 10, A Complete Overview by Chess Diagnostic. Hello everybody, welcome to Part 10, the last part of the Complete Chess Strategy course that I've made on YouTube. And today we're going to go through a complete game by Capablanca, playing as black here, versus an opponent called Leopoldo Carranza. I guess this was a 12-game exhibition against the 12 best Argentinian players. And I'm going to use this game to review and point out the important concepts that I reviewed in the previous 9 lessons that I made. And just to give a quick overview, so in the first one, we went over the most important idea, which is piece activity. In the second, we used piece activity to create a framework to evaluate positions, which is basically evaluating the activity, dividing it into 2 portions, with material being the quantitative advantage, and then piece activity, or the position of the pieces, being the qualitative factor. And then we went through Steinitz' 16 strategic elements, which, using piece activity, you'll be able to recognize them in specific positions. And from there, I went through a 4-part thought process that you can use when playing a long tournament control game, as well as how to analyze positions to improve your overall thinking system. And then I went through the 3 stages of the game, which is how your thinking should morph during an actual game. And then I reviewed each specific property of the piece, just an overall positional understanding. Alright, so starting in this game, from the opening, we can see that white plays e4 and Capablanca plays e5. So from the opening, pretty much we're following the 4 ideas, the 4 rules of the least active piece, which in the opening, that's pretty much all you're following, is the least active piece, because in the opening, all your pieces are sitting on either the 8th or the 1st rank here for white. And what you need to do is you need to get your army out, and in order to start a battle, you actually have to develop everything and get it forward. Before there's any contact of the pieces, then there's really no attack. There's really no chance for tactics to happen. Alright, so we can see that white is playing knight to f3 and threatening the e5 pawn. So when you're developing your pieces, what you want to do is you want to find ways to not only develop your least active piece, but to prevent certain pieces from being attacked. You do that basically by following the first part of the thought process, which is figuring out the threats that your opponent is making. So the best way is to play knight to c6, because it protects this pawn, as well as develops a knight, which was not very active. Alright, so it looks like we're just going for 4 knights or a 3 knights opening. Black could simply develop knight to f6, but Capablanca chooses not to do that, more for just personal considerations. So in this game, he actually plans to play f6, which is not actually the best move, but his idea is he wants to do that to, in a way, get his opponent, who was a master, out of book. So he plans to play f6 soon. Alright, so we can see that the bishop has been developed and is pinning this knight, and he's threatening to ruin our pawn structure here. So Capablanca simply plays knight from g to e7 to develop this knight, which is actually not the most active square. He could have just simply played bishop to d7, but again, he's planning to play f6 for a rather weird reason, but I guess it made sense to him at the time. Okay, so once the opening is done, the center control normally will take precedence, because whoever controls the center, if it's blocked or even if it's semi-open or completely open, then you'll be able to start an attack either on the flank, on the left or the right side, or just control the center and you'll be dominating with your greater activity. We're not at that point yet, but we can look at the threat here again. White is threatening to take the e5 pawn because this knight on c6 is not actually a defender because it's pinned. So at this point, he plays f6, using this pawn chain to bolster e5. Okay, so he could have played d5 here, but if he did that, then black has a counter attack just playing a6. And now if the bishop moves, then he'll just play b5. So he's not actually losing a piece. But white decides to simply take e5. And now Capablanca, instead of playing what the computer suggests here, which is just taking on the d file, he wants to keep his queens and keep as many pieces on the board. He plays f takes e5. All right, so he develops his bishop. This bishop is a little bit of a problem, but the opponent makes some small errors by simply trading pieces. And so one of the 4 rules that you want to follow is, if you notice that your opponent's piece is on your half of the board, you want to chase it back. You want to push it back either with a pawn thrust or simply trading it with a piece. So it looks like Capablanca notices here. We can go back a move. So we notice the 2 bishops are kind of presenting problems for black. They're pinning, first off, the light square bishop is pinning the knight to the king, and the dark square bishop is pinning this knight to the queen. So the rule that you want to follow is basically to trade or to get rid of the piece that is causing problems on your half of the board. So you can actually literally divide it here. Alright, so he decides to start chasing these pieces back with these 2 moves here. And so instead of just maintaining the pressure, which probably would have been better, white helps black out by simply trading the piece himself. Alright, so at this point he does have a little more free space, but his light squares are quite weak. So at this point he's castled, all his minor pieces are developed, and he's 1 move away from completing the opening. Basically, there's 3 things you want to accomplish in the opening. You want to develop your minor pieces first, which are your knights and your bishops, and then you want to castle for the double fold reason of protecting your king, as well as activating your rook. And once you've accomplished those 2 tasks, you can find where to put your queen. Because if you develop your queen too early, then your opponent will be able to chase your queen around and attack it, and it'll just cause problems for you and allow him to develop with tempos. Alright, so at this point, white decides to give black the bishop pair, as well as ruin white's pawn or black's pawn structure. Alright, so as you can see, basically he induced a weakness, white did, for black, but he also traded black's weak dark square bishop, and he traded his powerful knight on d5. So there's always trade-offs when you make those kind of decisions. And now black has these open files that he can use. So with this move, white was threatening to take the knight and ruin white's own pawn structure. But with this move, white is threatening to check the king and then win this pawn. So it looks like the computer is suggesting just to play c5, but I guess Capablanca thought this bishop out here was a little awkward, so he moves it back to control the light square diagonal. So as you can see, it's all about activity. The bishop is a little bit stronger than the knight, so when you centralize your bishop, it's actually has a bigger advantage than the knight, because the knight really doesn't have any squares to move. Even if he comes back here or comes here, there's really no squares, because black could simply push this pawn forward and there's nowhere for the knight to go. Okay, so it looks like at this point, after white has castled, the opening is over and the middle game has started. So in the middle game, you have to shift your thinking again, and what you want to do is you want to find a concrete object to attack. And if you can't find a concrete object, which you could define a concrete object as just a pawn or a square that's weak, that can't be protected by a piece or a pawn, and you want to occupy it. So in this case, well, I guess he could move the rook, but then that would just be a trade. But instead of doing that, Capablanca wants to play in the center, and so he just simply starts with a d5 push. So white's trying to maintain parity in the center, keep everything equal, but it allows black to get some greater activity. It's not a huge advantage, but... Okay, so as you can see with the last two moves, black has pushed his pawn to try to open the center for his bishop, and he's also gained a better central square for his queen. So black simply wants to start playing on the queen side now, because it looks like he's done all he can in the center, and he wants to induce pawn weaknesses. So that's his main idea. I guess Capablanca thought that it's going to head towards an endgame, and in the endgame it's all about the pawns, and so what you want to do is you want to try to induce as many weaknesses to attack. Alright, so we can ask what's the purpose of this move, and we can see it's simply threatening the queen, so we either need to move our queen or trade it, and we only have one option really. So the queen can move back, but Capablanca wants to play on the queen side at this point, so he moves queen to b6. Okay, so it looks like, I'm not sure exactly the idea of this move, but he probably could have just, well, it looks like the computer's suggesting he could have played a4, but he also could have brought his rook to bear on this file. But it looks like he wanted to play his knight here. It doesn't really accomplish much, so at this point they head towards an endgame, because white trades minor pieces and then queens. And so at this point we can see that black's pawn structure has actually been repaired. He has this kind of snaky chain, and then white has created a weakness, but also a semi-open file. So in the endgame, which the middle game didn't last too long, it was mostly just center play, but they quickly went towards an endgame where the precedence is attacking the opponent's weak pawns or creating a weakness and then pushing your pass pawns. And so Capablanca uses the idea of his rooks, which he knows that in order for rooks to be powerful, they need to have open lines or a rank, which preferably the 7th rank. And so his long-term goal is to create a weakness on the queen side and to give open files or ranks for his rook, for either one or two of his rooks. So he consolidates his pawn structure. This is a very strong pawn structure, and there's really no way to attack it. Whereas this it's not totally weak, but it's definitely weaker. So in the endgame, an idea is that your king is a normal piece. It becomes a fighting piece that you want to use, and some chess books say the king's worth about 4 points, 4 pawns. So what you want to do with your king is you want to centralize it and use it to attack weak pawns and push past pawns. Alright, so white is following that same idea. He wants to centralize his king. But now black comes up with his plan, a concrete plan, to push this pawn. And so he starts advancing this pawn, and then eventually he'll double rooks on this file. So with this move, pretty much he just wants to prevent white from gaining counterplay on the king's side. But at this point he starts, well, it looks like this move he could have played there, and then he would have just advanced his pawns to try to get some counterplay. So Capablanca wants to prevent that. Alright, with this move, basically, Capablanca wants to close everything off. It's definitely not the strongest move, because it allows h4. So at this point, everything's closed off, and now white has a backward pawn. So we'll go back a couple moves here. Alright. So it looks like white was planning to advance his pawns and gain some counterplay on the king's side, but Capablanca wants to maintain parity on that side. So he could have moved here and moved his rook over, either to this square or that square. But he decides not to do that, and so this is definitely a mistake. So now the king's side is completely closed. This backward pawn is not going anywhere. He'll have to trade it, or just give it away eventually. So at this point, Capablanca follows his plan of doubling the rooks. White wants to keep his king as much in the center as possible. So as you can see, there's really no way that white could have prevented black's plan on the queen side. He's going to force, with the pawn thrust, the open file on the a file, and he'll pretty much dominate it. Alright, so this is an important move, chasing back the white king from the center. Of course, white doesn't want to trade rooks, because every trade, especially in this position, will just make his pawns weaker and weaker. He wants to keep all the heavy pieces he can to defend his pawns. Alright, so at this point he's forcing a rook trade. Now a pair of rooks have come off, which allows this next move. So he's accomplished two objectives here. So his positional understanding allows him to know that, so he has rooks, he has a pair of rooks. In order to take advantage of them, he needs to provide open files and ranks. And that's exactly what he's done. He's given this rook the a file, as well as the seventh, or the second rank, I guess you could say, from white. So this kind of move, you can see a move back, completely restricting his own activity. You can see the kind of sad position that white has been put in. Eventually he'll be put in a zugzwang, because he'll just have no moves to protect these pawns. Alright, so at this point, Capablanca has just been following the two main plans that you'll follow in an endgame, which is either pushing your passed pawns or creating a passed pawn, as well as attacking the opponent's weak pawns. So he's using his rook to attack these pawns, and he's using this pawn formation, this pawn majority, versus these two, to create a passed pawn. Of course, he wants to bring his king over, because that's a piece as well that can provide some support. Alright, so because of the value of pawns in an endgame, you don't really want to trade them for nothing. The main idea is to win as many pawns for nothing as possible. And you can do that by simply restricting the opponent and winning them for nothing. So because this pawn's so weak, black is able to advance this pawn and lock it in place. So the two long-term weaknesses are this pawn and this pawn. And there's really nothing white can do to prevent their loss. Alright, so this is a very interesting sacrifice. Capablanca gives a pawn to clear the way for his king, as well as clear the second rank for his rook. Oh, so as you can see, at this point there's total domination. The dark squares are way too weak. Black's king is coming in. The rook dominates this rank, restricting the king as well as this rook, and he's threatening all these weak pawns. So even though black is actually down a pawn, he's completely winning because of the position. So white would love to trade this rook, but at this point, which is the end of the game, we can analyze here that white has absolutely no move. He can't move the rook back. He can't move the rook here, because if he does, for example, here, you can see that black will skewer the white king to win the rook, like this. So the rook has no moves because these are covered by the pawn. And if the king moves here, it's another skewer. So he's forced to pretty much give up the pawn. And the computer's saying a mate in 10 here. But either way, black will win all of white's pawns and eventually the rook, let alone this passed pawn that'll be pushed soon. So at this point, white resigned. As you can see, throughout the entire stage of the game, it flowed very simply. And that's how Capablanca's play looked. And even he would say that he didn't calculate too much. He would look one move ahead. And so we have to ask how he was able to do that. And it's all related to the previous 9 lessons I talked about. The most important idea of activity, how to simply evaluate chess positions. Capablanca was able to notice the specific strategic element in a position. Of course, he used a thought process to not make simple errors, and he knew how the 3 stages of the game flowed. The most important thing was how the piece understanding of each piece incorporates into the entire game, and how you can use that to find the right move almost with no calculation. Alright, so I hope this part 10 helped to tie some of the what seem like separate elements together. So we're going to start a tactics course, and it's I'm going to go through basically all the methods that you can use to calculate, as well as basic tactics. I think basic tactics are some of the most helpful things you can do to actually improve your game, because it's definitely just a skill. It's like learning your multiplication tables. So just leave a comment and let me know what you think about this lesson, and let me know what you'd like to see in future lessons, especially tactical courses. So I'll see you later, and have a good day.